Welcome to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast with Jacob Ayers, providing actionable content to help you along your journey to financial freedom through real estate investing. As the premier asset class, real estate has helped ordinary people just like you amass fortunes. The benefits of passive income from real estate investing will allow you to live a life you want. And now your host, entrepreneur, real estate investor, and apartment deal syndicator, Jacob Ayers.
Hi, and welcome to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast, episode 143. Hi, I'm your host, Jacob Ayers. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I'm so glad you're here. Now, I'm excited about this week's guest, and he is David Pere. You may have heard David alongside me on the Bigger Pockets podcast, episode 281, where I first met David. And since then, him and I have made a connection and bonded over real estate investing and blogs and creating content just like this podcast. So I'm really excited to have him on today. We're going to be discussing his journey as investing as an active Marine stationed in Hawaii while investing in his home state of Missouri. So there's going to be lots of great takeaways from there. Looking forward to it. So without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode. All right, today I welcome on the show Mr. David Pere. David, hey, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Well, hey, David, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, how you guys started investing in real estate, and kind of your journey up to this point.
Yeah, so I am an active duty Marine. I just rounded 10 years. So been in the Marine Corps for basically my entire adult life. Been around the world a little bit here and there, and I'd always kind of had an interest in real estate. I don't really know where that sparked from. Maybe watching, HGTV, who knows. And I'd always kind of been interested in it, but I didn't really know anyone who dabbled in real estate or knew anything about it other than owning a house, which, as we all know, does not necessarily make you an investor. So it wasn't until, and I kicked myself for this because I became a recruiter in 2013. And when I went on recruiting duty in Missouri, I was like, wow, houses are super affordable. I finally get a housing allowance now because I'm going to be living outside of the base. I'm going to buy myself a house and do a fix and flip or a live-in flip or a burr, and I didn't know any of these terms. I was like, I'm just going to buy an ugly house and make it pretty and then sell it when I leave. And then I talked myself out of it very quickly because I went to meet with a realtor and was like, wow, I don't know any of this stuff, and went and rented an apartment. And 2 years later, and it was actually not real estate related at all. This guy was trying to get me to do network marketing. Can't remember the name of the company, but he told me to read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I was like, nah, I don't read. Or, Marine, dumb, drive truck, whatever. And so I talked myself out of reading the book. So finally he's like, look, I gave you this link, go download Audible. Your first book is free. So listen to it. He's like, how much time you spend in the car? And at the time as a recruiter, I'm in the car 2, 3, 4 hours a day. So I'm like, all the time. And so I read the whole book via Audible in 3-4 days. And that totally changed my life. I ended up I didn't do the whole network marketing thing with him partially. I probably would have given it a shot, but there was no time in the day to be trying to sell other stuff on recruiting duty. But I read the book. And then the next book I read was Brandon Turner, Bigger Pockets, the book on rental property investing. And then I read the book on no and low money down, also Brandon Turner. And I don't really remember which order those two books were in, but I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad in September, October, and closed on a house hack duplex December 28th of that year. So I basically the biggest takeaway I got from all those books was just do it. You're never going to have all your questions answered. Take action. And I was like, okay, great. House hack sounds awesome. My lease is ending. Let's find a property. And that's exactly what I did. I gave myself till the end of the year and I made it by 3 days. And then I ended up getting married very shortly after that. So I only actually lived in the duplex for a couple of months before realizing it was more beneficial to live with my wife than to live on my own in a duplex.
Yeah, I love it. So, you open that Rich Dad, Poor Dad, like so many people, that just starts like this black hole, this rabbit hole of information from there. And you just get sucked into this world of real estate investing and investing in general. And, being a business owner, not an employee, right? You think of the four quadrants of the book. And yeah, really cool stuff there. So, at this point in your time, you're thinking, well, I'm going to go and just do my very first house hack. And you didn't really know what that meant, but you thought, hey, I'm going to buy this duplex. So walk us through what that looked like and, just kind of show us what that was.
Yeah, so I kind of lucked out because in Missouri, you don't really have to look that hard for deals. And I don't mean that deals are just growing off trees or everybody would be investing there. I just mean that the cost of living is so low that you can buy a very affordable duplex and it'll still cash flow. It might not make you rich, but it'll make you a couple $100 and it won't cost much to get into. So I just basically, I did it all the wrong way. I just called the first realtor that I found on Google when I typed in real estate agent near me, and I went with them. And I, just walked through at probably 10, 15 properties until I found one that I was like, yep, this looks good, and ran all the numbers via the Bigger Pockets calculator, which if you're not a pro member, I think you can use like 5 times. So I'm lucky that I got that done in the first like 5 times, or I would have been doing it on paper and I wouldn't have known what I was doing. Everything seemed to work out. And I have this, it's going to bite me one of these days really hard, but I have this mentality when I come to a hard place and I'm like, I don't know which direction to go with this. I usually go, well, this could either like make me or break me, but either way, it's going to make a good story. So let's go for it. And that's like my decision. Like if it's close enough to being doable that I can justify it being worth telling the story someday, I'm like, screw it. We'll see what happens. So realistically, I probably was not prepared on my numbers, but we went in and did it. I haven't used that agent again because I've learned a lot since then, but everything worked out, luckily enough. So still own it, still cash flow. I used an FHA loan, which is another thing I kicked myself for because, as I mentioned, I'm a military member, which means that there's this thing called the VA loan that is amazing. And nobody in the military understands it, myself included, because I was like dead convinced you can only use it one time, and if you do use it a second time, it's not 0% down, and you're why would you waste it on such a cheap property? And
yeah,
now I look back and I'm like, I'm an idiot. I'm paying another $80 a month on PMI, like primary mortgage insurance, on that duplex just because I didn't understand I could use the VA again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think one thing I want to pull out of here, what you said, David, so far is this little nugget you took away from Rich Dad Poor Dad was just to go do it, and like now you're living this philosophy of if you come to a fork in the road and you're looking at this decision, looks marginal, you're going to go with the one that makes a better story. So what I'm getting out of this is you really like to just jump in, take action, before you necessarily know everything. And I think that prevents a lot of people from really getting started, especially, younger investors. They want to study everything, know everything. And truth is, you probably will never know everything. So, it's better to get started, educate yourself a little bit, but, start taking action. And, that's probably what's really driven you along as far as you've gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously I'm a huge fan of networking, just like yourself. That's how we met. But if you get to a point where you have like 1 or 2 people who've done something, I'm lucky enough to know a couple people that have been very successful in real estate at this point. And so if it's a really weird deal and I have no idea, I'll bounce it off them. And I'm not looking for them to, some people like seem to hit you up and they're like, hey, here's all these numbers. Here's this. Can you run a full analysis on it? Like whatever. Like all I'm looking for is, hey man, look, here's its income. Here's its expense. Here's why it's weird. Does that raise any red flags? And if they can't think of any like immediate red flag, then I'm like, okay, cool. We're still on the buffer zone for just jump off the cliff and see what happens. And that's kind of like my safety net to myself is like, okay, he had no red flags. I have no red flags. Like it's close enough. Let's go for it. But you're right. You will never learn everything via podcast, YouTube, book. I mean, you'll learn a ton that way. And that's the best thing you can do for yourself is spend time every day learning. But you will never, like once you jump off the cliff and take the action and whatever, like you'll find that in that process, all of a sudden all your questions got answered and everything you didn't know became evident, or something you didn't know that you didn't know became evident. But you'll answer all these questions and you'll get to the end of the road. And even if it doesn't work out, you're like, holy smokes, I learned a ton from that. And I think that just doing it is probably the fastest way to learn something.
Yeah, definitely so. And let's talk about that learning networking piece. You kind of mentioned it, but you and I actually met because we are guests on Bigger Pockets podcast, show 281. So that was, a really fun experience being on the Bigger Pockets podcast together, talking about our journeys individually getting started investing in real estate. And that's how we met. And, that goes to prove, both the learning and the networking piece, right? So, you and I were probably both originally drawn to Bigger Pockets for both of those reasons. We're there networking with other people, learning right alongside with people. It turns into this connection, and here we are. So, talk about, the importance to you of both learning that initial education piece and then just continuing to build your network.
Yeah. So, shameless plug, he said show 281.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And same thing. Like I realized very quickly as I was trying to learn things that if I had a question, I'd go and I'd try to Google it or YouTube it. And it was like, I could not get away from Bigger Pockets. It was like every single answer that popped up was like Bigger Pockets Forum. And I'm like, okay, what is this website and how is it taken over Google? So good job, whoever does their search engine optimization. And so learning and networking, I'm going to write like a book one of these days. I'm telling myself that. It may never happen, but I have a bunch of notes written on a yellow legal pad over here. Just because like personal development is so awesome and there's just so many different angles to come at this, but I think like the biggest thing is so many people are frustrated with their situation and they will sit there and they will try to change their situation and they won't try to change themselves. Like for instance, let's sit for a really weird analogy that just popped into my head and we'll see if it works as we go.
Okay.
If you're driving a truck, right? If you're from the Midwest, you drive your truck and you go out in the mud and you get stuck, right? Like you wouldn't get out of the truck and say, okay, well, let's drain the mud puddle. That was the problem. The mud puddle was the problem. You would say, maybe I need bigger tires. Maybe I need a bigger lift. Maybe I should upgrade my truck. Maybe I shouldn't go in the mud in the first place. And people don't think about life that way. They sit there and they're like, my job is terrible because my boss is a jerk. Maybe your job is terrible because you don't like your job and you could go look at some other place to work. Or maybe you're terrible and that's why your boss is a jerk. And that's not an easy thing to say or to accept and for me or anyone. But sometimes you just are not good at whatever it is and it is your fault. And the faster you learn that, and even if it's not your fault, it's your responsibility to fix it, the better it becomes. So learning and teaching yourself is absolutely crucial because once you come to that realization, you'll take time to learn. And then networking, it's amazing the things that you will come across via networking. I went to a networking event like 2 years ago where I got lucky enough to meet Brandon Turner. But through that, I met a guy named Corey Nimoto, and we're about to close a flip that we're doing out here in Hawaii, which I never would have even thought about trying to do a fix and flip out here if I hadn't met him. I met Brandon, which has, been amazing. He's just a super cool dude, but it's always nice I met Doug Nordman, who dragged me into FinCon next week. And so like all these guys that are further along than you, like learning something's great, but then going and having someone tell you like, yeah, that's a great life lesson. I've been there. I've done that. You learned the lesson. You're talking about it, but like you haven't done anything with it. You should get off your butt and go do it. Like it's just amazing what can come from all of that.
Yeah, I love it. And, to people out there getting started, I always recommend first start off educating yourself, pick up books, listen to podcasts like this or Bigger Pockets or whatever, go to networking events, go to meetups, and then start networking and building your circle and being around people who are doing it is what you want to do. And then eventually, you just got to take that action. Like you said, you just jump into it, take action. You can't just, be in this learning phase forever. You can't be in this networking phase forever, but those are two very crucial pieces to this whole recipe. So let's start talking about the taking action piece, David. You've mentioned you bought that very first house hack duplex, lived in one side, got that low down payment. Looking back, there's some mistakes you made. You could have done, a little bit better on your financing. So you moved out of that. You've still got that duplex. And then what was next from there?
Next was, so my wife kind of did a BRRRR strategy without knowing what a BRRRR strategy was. So before we met, she had bought the house across from her parents' street, super cheap, basically some guy overdosed, didn't die, but overdosed and was,
Oh, wow.
yeah, kind of turned himself into a vegetable. And so they had to sell the property. His family did. And it's funny, you hear my wife tell the story and she'll say she like, my in-laws have like an apartment in their barn and she was crashing there for a little bit. And you'll hear her say that she would like walk out the street when people were looking at the house and be like, make sure the agent tells you about the guy who died in there. So anyway, so she got it dirt cheap. And then my father-in-law built houses for 30 years. So he just remodeled it with her and a couple other friends for, no cost. So they did labor they did parts, but no labor. So super cheap. And so she has this house that's awesome, great shape, but not a lot of money into it. So the next thing we did was we pulled a home equity line of credit out on that. And then using that, we bought a 10-plex. So in Missouri as well. So it's not very expensive compared to everyone else. I'm not going to name price because someone will get all frustrated, but you definitely can buy a cheap 10 unit if you look hard enough. So it cash flows for about, I don't know, it cash flows for like $1,200 a month after all said and done. And I guess I said I wouldn't name price, but it was like 200. We closed at 212. And so it makes a very solid amount of cash flow for the amount that we had to put into it with seller financing and a HELOC.
Yeah, David. Well, I really want to dive into that HELOC, but before we do, let's jump into a quick break for this week's sponsor, Commercial Loan Success. For those of you who have heard episode 127, you remember our guest, John Matheson from Commercial Loan Success. Well, I'm now a customer of CLS myself, and here's why. Their software platform has enabled me to vet a couple of deals I'm working on. It's very intuitive to use. I simply put in my income and expense numbers, and in minutes, I know if my deal is favorable in the bank's eyes. Now, not only can you vet a deal for lending if you own rental property and you are looking to sell or refinance, you can establish a realistic selling price or find out how you look before going into the bank. Now, I know many of you are in the market for properties, and I have not found a better tool to use than CLS. They have screeners for apartments, mixed use, and pure commercial properties. On top of that, they have a resource center full of videos and tutorials if you need some extra help. So if that's something that you might be interested in, check out the link in the show notes for more information. Well, David, coming back to that HELOC, tell us exactly what that is and how you used it.
Yeah, so I'm in the military. I'm terrible about acronyms, and I apologize.
No worries.
Line of credit. So the home equity line of credit is basically saying the easiest way to say it would be if I have a house that's worth $200,000 and I owe $100,000, the bank will let me loan the difference between what I owe up to 70 or 80%. So if it was 80%, 160,000. So the difference between me owing 100 and the 160,000 mark, they would let me take a loan on. But it's not a traditional loan where you pull out the 60,000, you have to repay it. It's like basically like a checking account. So you only pay interest on the money that you've used. Traditionally, it's interest only for a certain period of time. The interest rates are super low. Mine's like 3.4%. It's probably the best money you can get lender wise because, and here's a big, awesome factor about it is if you get to a point where you've used the home equity line of credit and you're like not worried about, you're not sure you're going to pay it back, this, that, and the other, because there is a balloon at the end of like 20 years, you have to have it all paid off or whatever. If you sell the house, the loan's paid off, you're done. That's it. And so it's super cool because it's like this super cheap money that you can get. And then, if you ever get to the point where you're like, man, I don't know if I'm going to end up repaying this, just sell the house and move on. And now you no longer owe it because it's not an actual loan. It's just you borrowing against your house. So it's super awesome way to find some extra capital.
Yeah, so that HELOC is a way to unlock equity in your property rather than selling it or refinancing it. So
absolutely, which the refinance is a very good option that I probably could have looked into as well.
Yeah, and one of the pieces of the BRRRR strategy, right? So that's buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and then repeat. So yeah, crucial part of that BRRRR strategy. I've done it in several of my properties. Has really helped me, grow my portfolio and scale. So awesome stuff there. Now, David, you are investing from overseas. Now you live in Hawaii, so tell us about that and what it's like investing back in stateside.
Yeah, so I live in paradise, and when I say paradise, I mean Jumanji. If you follow the news at all this year, we've had ballistic missile threat, 3 hurricanes, the volcanoes erupting, 30,000 acres worth of wildfire, which there's not that much acreage here, so that's a lot. A tiger got loose, 52 inches of rain over one of the hurricanes last week. It's been kind of weird.
That really does sound like Jumanji.
Yeah, it's actually really funny, but I guess not for the people who got 6 feet or 4.5 feet of rain last week, but
Yeah.
but I love it out here. However, there's no way to buy and hold rentals out here. I mean, the money, it's just a 3-bed, 1.5 bathroom house that's maybe 1,200 square feet is like $850,000. And it will rent for $3 or $4 grand. So if you know anything about like basic rental math, right, there is like no way to justify spending almost $1 million on something that's barely going to make you $4 grand. And by make you $4 grand, I mean lose money because your mortgage payment's going to be more than that. So the best strategy out here is appreciation or fix and flips, which is great and all, but it's just not passive. So if I do dabble in that, which I've only dabbled in the one fix and flip out here that I'm partnered on, I take that money and I send it home passively to invest in real estate, because $1 million home or $1 million in Missouri will buy me like a 25-unit, 30-unit apartment complex rather than a house that is old and on like a quarter of an acre. So it just does not make sense out here to do the buy and hold stuff. So I was doing that anyway, and I was familiar with the Missouri area from being a recruiter. And then I read this book by David Green, which is also a podcast host for the Bigger Pockets, called Long Distance Real Estate Investing. And that just made everything, it just streamlined everything, because that book talks about all of his systems and strategies. And it really just simplifies the whole concept of investing overseas. And for me, having a really solid agent, which I do have now, and having a solid property manager, she's amazing. So amazing that I have stopped ever giving her information out, because I was referring her to people and realized that eventually she was going to get too busy for me. So I stopped.
So what was her name again?
Yeah, no. I'll give you my agent's name. My agent's great. But I got a solid property manager and a solid agent. And I mean, they're good enough that if I say, hey, I'm looking at this property, they'll meet up and they'll go take a look at it together for me. They'll video it. They'll take pictures of it. They'll tell me straight up, hey, don't buy this house, or the other way around. And in fact, the big deal that I'm on right now, which we can talk about later, my agent actually was the one who brought it to my attention. So, and then they're working on everything right now. We should close next week.
Yeah, I love it. And so going back to that book by our buddy David Green, super cool guy, long distance real estate investing. Now, I invest out of state as well, not quite as long distance as you, David, but I thought, I had some pretty good systems in place. And I read that book, and man, David's got a lot of cool tips, a lot of good resources and apps. So after I read that book, I had like 5 new apps downloaded on my phone. I was like just doing things a little more differently and efficiently. Really made me think about building better processes and systems. And that's really crucial to someone like yourself. I mean, you're 6 or 7 hour time difference from your property. So lots of coordination with your team on the ground there. And just that, the whole logistics of, being able to make a call to your property manager or, check in on something is, even magnified by that time difference. So yeah, tell us a little bit about how you've managed your real estate from that far away, and what it's like, just having that almost maybe trepidation, of like investing so far away, not being able to see it, touch it as frequently. Talk about that piece.
I guess part of that goes into the whole make a good story aspect, right? When I'm on the fence, I roll with it. But it really, having a solid team is what has done it for me. And then having to realize I read The Miracle Morning, and now I'm up at like 4 a.m. to do my morning routine, which is not always fun, but it has been very productive, especially because early mornings here is the only way that I can accomplish anything. Because by the time I'm going into work, the majority of people are almost done with their day. For example, it's probably around lunchtime, your time, or getting there, and the sun's not up yet. So
yeah, right.
It gets a little complicated when I'm sitting on the couch at 5 a.m. trying to conference call my way through property manager stuff. And I'm trying to wake up, and they're like, I'm trying to eat lunch. And I'm like, I'm sorry. But I would say that it really just comes down to having a good team and trusting your team. And then just trusting your gut. Don't listen to the fear, and don't talk yourself out of it. And I actually, I flew home last month when I was this one property that we're under contract on right now, just because it was the fear of the what ifs and all this other stuff. I had no intentions. I was going to buy this. It's like a $2.8 million, 67,000 square foot building, and I was going to buy it sight unseen and just roll with it. And then I got in my head my fears, and I was like, okay, you know what? So we had a 4-day weekend, and I flew home, and I literally like landed Saturday and flew back Monday. And I mean, that was a necessary evil. At least it's a tax write-off, right? But overall, like for duplexes and stuff, yeah, I don't ever care. I mean, honestly, I don't even need to see a whole ton of pictures if they tell me what's what. I have buddies out there now that are contractors and enough contacts that I can say, you know, hey, I need you, and you to go to the house and tell me if it's worth buying, if it's in a decent neighborhood, can I negotiate the price? How much is it going to cost to fix whatever's wrong with it? And that's that. They tell me straight up, and they haven't been wrong yet. So
yeah, that's awesome and super vital to your success as a real estate investor, having those local contacts and just that kind of infrastructure and network, boots on the ground type stuff. So it's really helped me invest out of state. Well, one thing I want to touch on before we jump into that deal, which I do want to get into the details because it sounds super interesting. It's probably going to make for a good story one way or the other. But before we get into that, let's talk about what it was like, you know, getting started investing in real estate as like, you know, essentially a broke or recent, you know, young professional, right? So I bought my very first property when I was like maybe 2 years out of college, didn't have any, you know, kind of sort of money to my name. I had a good job, but so, you know, talk about like, you know, what that was like and starting with like pretty much little to no money. We talked about that book by Brandon Turner, Investing in Real Estate with Low or No Money Down. Awesome, great book. It's one of the very first books I read, and it really gave me some ideas to creatively finance real estate. So talk about what it was like for you.
yeah, creativity is a wonderful thing because so if this deal closes technically, I guess, because they count net worth, technically we would be accredited investors over $1 million in net worth. But the reality is that that's still not even close in actual cash. And that's just through creativity. So the first deal, like I said, I used the FHA loan. So I needed to come up with like $3,500, $3,200 at closing.
Yeah, pretty reasonable there.
Yeah, but I probably would have struggled to even have that because I blew all my money on, you know, your typical Marine stuff, alcohol, tattoo, fast car, Harley, you know, all this. I came back from Afghanistan and I bought a truck, a rifle, 2 tattoos, and I don't remember what else. Oh, and the Harley, and I had no money left from the deployment. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this Harley's awesome. So I think, and I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure the only reason that I had the cash for the down payment on that is because my Harley had been totaled 6 months prior, and I still had that money sitting in a bank account. And so I think that was really, at least I got something out of the Harley, but I had not been very smart with my money at all. And that has forced me to be very creative and also to adjust my savings rate and all that stuff with my income. But creativity. So the first one was the FHA loan, which is pretty straightforward. But since then, like the 10plex I used, I'm a huge fan of seller financing. To date, every time I've used seller financing, which has only been like 2 or 3 times so far, but I've only ever paid 4% interest, which on commercial property is like unheard of right now.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can do some very interesting things with negotiation. So we'll talk in a minute. But like for my 10plex, I'm paying 4% interest on the 10,000 they lent me or whatever, but it's over like 5 years. But there were some other concessions in there that I wouldn't be able to do with a normal bank. And then it also allowed me to, so instead of paying the normal, the bank wanted 20% down, and I ended up only coming out with 5% out of my own pocket because we use the seller financing for the buffer there. And if you can find like a local bank, usually they're better with it, but the local community banks, my lender will let me factor in seller financing. So a lot of times it's worth it to say, hey, look, I can give you less than your asking price and we can do XYZ, or I can give you your full asking price, but you need to let me make payments to you for the last 20% of it rather than a down payment. And you can walk into a property for, you might not have as much equity, but a lot less out of pocket. If it still cash flows, it's worth doing.
Yeah, sure. Certainly. And I remember when I was first getting started, David, like I didn't even think of leverage to begin with, right? I would think like, okay, well, I can't afford a $100,000 single family property to buy. I don't have $100,000. oh, there's this thing called, leverage, getting a loan
Yeah.
from the bank. Okay, now that makes sense. So it's still, traditional financing would, be 20% down. So, well, it's still $20,000. I don't know if I can swing that as a recent college graduate, right? And then you start
Yeah.
thinking of all these different creative ways to buy real estate. There's just there's a whole book about it out there by our buddy Brandon Turner, but we don't need to get into all of those. But there's just lots of creative ways that if you want to get into real estate, you can get into it in some pretty creative fashions for very low money down. And so that's helped you get into what, you're into some really creative stuff now. So building up to it, you've got this really cool property under contract. Tell us about it. It's really unique. You and I have talked a little bit, last week about it. So tell us about, what's going on there, and just dive into it.
Yeah. So this thing's a doozy. So it's called the Majestic, and it was the Majestic Steakhouse. So it was built in 1996. It's 67,000 square feet. The first 2 floors are apartments. The top 2 floors are commercial stuff. It was originally a steakhouse. So this guy had a 4-story monstrosity of a steak restaurant, like 3 kitchens, 20 apartments for like his chefs to live in. It's just insane. Apparently there was a wait out the door too. So it was quite the place. It was the place to be in. It's in Branson, Missouri, which is like a show. They call it like the Vegas of the Midwest, but it's like a lot of shows and musicals and stuff. It's actually a pretty cool town. One of those weird places with like 11,000 residents and like 9 million tourists every year in the middle of nowhere, Midwest U.S. And so the guy died, and the property just kind of went untouched for like 13 years, sat vacant. So this gentleman bought it like 3 years ago and started fixing everything up on it and slowly renting stuff out. And then he is trying to move all of his money from that deal to, he bought an old officer quarters in Puerto Rico that he's turning into a condo resort. And so he's just trying to pull his cash out and move there. So it's still not fully rented. So there's a lot of value add there, and there's a pretty good price, but he wanted to sell either a conventional loan so he could take the cash from the down payment, or do a lease option so that he could pull a loan out on what was, basically use the building as collateral to move his money. And so we're going to close on this thing. It should be like Monday or Tuesday. It's basically whenever my check decides that it's actually going to arrive in the mail, rather than sitting somewhere between Hawaii and Missouri, because it's just, no one knows where it is, because learning experience, decided that I would just stick it in the normal mail rather than overnight it, because I thought, oh yeah, sure, if I put it in the mail Monday, it'll be there by Friday. And now it's floating around somewhere in the, it's like Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory. It's in a million pieces in the air, and no one knows what's up with it. Luckily it's a check, so it can't be spent by anyone else. So, whatever. But so I will now overnight everything, even if I have a whole week for it to get there. So we will close whenever my check gets there. And we are going to buy, it's $2.795 million for $150,000 down with some pretty cool terms. So he's going to finance it's like $2.645 million at 4% interest with it was originally a 10-year balloon, but since we're doing the lease option, it'll be a 5-year option to purchase or extend. 4% interest for the first 3 years, 5% interest for the next years, and then it's interest only for the first year. So we're basically getting handed a loan for a property where, hey, I don't have to pay principal for the first year, so we can get the rest of the stuff rented out. And then the follow-on years, it'll be 4 up to 5%, which is less than a conventional loan would ever be for commercial real estate. And we paid like 5.2% down on a almost $3 million property that is already going to be not super cash flow positive, but cash flow positive. So even after paying the property manager, the maintenance guy, and the like $9,000 utility bill, which is just mind boggling.
Wow.
It's ridiculous to talk about numbers in the size of this. Like when I go from thinking about like my 10-plex, it was like $200,000 to like, oh yeah, that was like $800 a month in utilities. And then I'm like looking through utility bills and I'm like balking, because I'm like, wow, this is a lot, but the numbers work. So, so it'll probably be like $2,000 cash flow. maybe for the first little bit. And then in March, there are 5 more tenants that have already signed leases and have deposits and stuff in. We just need to fix their spaces up, and that'll bring the net operating income up like 75 to 8,500 a month. At which point it'll cash flow pretty substantial, and then there's still going to be 4 commercial spaces to rent out, and then there's actually room for me to build another residential apartment downstairs, which I plan on doing. So by the time we're all said and done, it should be 25 residential apartments and somewhere between 15 and 18 commercial tenants, depending on how we rent those spaces out, including a paintball place in the parking lot, because it has 350 parking spots and they're only using like 100 to 200 of them ever. So we like took the back section, and the guy who's selling it said, hey, look, they want to build a paintball place. If it doesn't work out, I will pay you the lease for the next 18 months. So I'm like, well, paintball place might not be the most ideal, but if the seller is going to give me the money, whether it works out for them or not, then I'm obviously going to say yes. So, so it's a very strange, lots of stuff coming in, and way bigger than anything I've ever done or thought about doing. But I couldn't really justify saying no to, I mean, I guess the risk exposure is not that much. So I have a partner on this. It's actually a family member. So between the two of us, I brought in like 50,000. He brought in 100,000, and then I'm running all the operations, and he's hopefully enjoying his life and passive income, as there's hopefully no hiccups.
Sure.
So we brought in the 150, but because it's a lease option, if we fail to make the payment, we can't be foreclosed on. We just lose the property. There's no foreclosure period. There's no bank involvement. There's no credit. There was no credit check. You know, the amount of ease that it comes with just doing seller finance lease option purchase is awesome. So if we lose the property, like worst case scenario, we're out our $150,000, which is a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but we don't get foreclosed on. It doesn't affect our credit. It doesn't affect me being able to get another loan in the future. It doesn't affect anything. I lose my money. Is what it is. Learning experience, good story, and move on to the next property or whatever. But if it does work out and all of the numbers that we're running are correct, then the purchase price at 2.8, once it's fully rented with the same cap rate, it'll be worth somewhere between 4.5 and 5.2 million in 3 to 5 years. And it'll make anywhere from $9,000 to $15,000 a month cash flow for us after all expenses. So it's like, we could lose 150 grand, or we could gain like $120,000 a year into our pocket and a $2 million valuation increase. Which one is the risk worth the reward? Yeah, it's definitely worth the reward. So
yeah. Well, you've got a unique perspective on your risk on this thing. So, right, you know, you're going into it and you've got kind of a protected downside. Like worst case scenario, the project fails, it goes south, whatever. You're out $150,000, which is a substantial amount of money for you and your partner at this point in your investing career. But
yeah, it's my whole HELOC.
Yeah, but the upside is it's got such a high potential upside that it's worth that risk. So those risks going into it, and you've got a lot of mitigation plans, and got some infrastructure. You've got your property manager in place. So really cool stuff. Now just to recap, this is a 60,000 square foot mixed use building, apartments, commercial tenants. You've got some paintball going in the parking lot. Yeah. So a lot of interesting stuff. You don't have any experience operating a steakhouse. You don't have any experience, being a paintball landlord. So tell us about, like the trepidation of going into this and just, overcoming that fear, aside from your just do it for the story kind of, mentality, like talk about, you did a duplex, and then you scale up and do a 10 unit, and you've done a couple flips here and there, but this is like drastically bigger than anything you've ever done. So, talk about, just the overcoming the fear and just taking that action.
Yeah. So the fear is why I finally just broke down and bought a $1,000 flight over a weekend to come walk through it, which the building's so big, it took almost 3.5 hours to walk through this thing, which is just mind boggling. So I guess part of the justification for it is the fact that it's no longer a steakhouse. It's been broken into a bunch of other commercial tenants. So there's like a murder mystery theater and like a family string quartet and a wedding venue and an escape room and there's going to be like a high-end chef / bar. So I guess realizing that the difference between a commercial tenant and a residential tenant is not really that big fundamentally. Like obviously there's a lot that goes into, if the business goes out of business, then they're not going to pay your lease. Well, yeah. And I mean, that's a big fear because if my $7,000 a month tenant goes out of business, that's going to be a big chunk of change. But the reality is that a business going out of business and moving out via no money is probably still an easier process than dealing with a tenant. It's a bigger scale, but if a tenant loses their job and has no money, the odds are that they're going to stay there and you're going to have to go through an eviction process, right? Depending on the tenant, but that's what my experience has been, is they just like, I can't afford life. Please let me live here for free. Like, no, sorry, that's not how this works. Whereas if a business goes out of business, like if my murder mystery theater lady goes out of business, she's probably not going to try to stay there because she's out of business. So like what point is there in her, like she doesn't live there. She's going to leave because she's no longer making any money. So why would you want to be indebted to me for somewhere you're not living? Like you can just move your stuff out and be gone. So I don't think you have to deal with the eviction process nearly as much as far as if they go out of business. Now, if they just decide to stop paying, okay. But again, then they have a business to lose rather than just an apartment complex. So I think it's much more to lose in that regard. And the other thing is, I mean, they're business owners, so they don't necessarily manage the building themselves, but they, generally speaking, can take care of themselves. And I don't mean to say that residential tenants need to be babysat, but a commercial tenant, my real estate center that's downstairs, Century 21 or whatever, like they run a business, they can probably manage to just like pay their rent. Like they take care of themselves. So it's not much of a headache. And then again, solid property manager. I actually have a live-in maintenance guy who he was paying rent. He's not going to pay rent anymore because I think that's good. So I have a live-in maintenance guy. I have an on-site property manager. She doesn't live there, but she works there. And she's actually the one who's going to be taking over the management for the paintball place. So she's going to work with my property manager, and my property manager will run like the whole building and everything else. So I have it kind of goes back to the team. Everyone so far seems to think, no massive red flags. And then through all of those fears, I don't know. Just, I guess talking to people and just kind of looking, it really kind of came down to like looking at the numbers, looking at the downside, looking at the upside. Oh, and the other cool thing. So because we're lease optioning, the seller is awesome. So we were talking about all this, and I was kind of nervous about everything, and he gave me a reference of a guy to call, and I ended up not really talking to him much about like how he's done business with this, with the guy I'm buying from. But I just kind of asked him like, hey, would you do another lease option with him? Like, did everything go okay? And the guy's done 30 different lease option purchases from this gentleman.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, hang on. So I start talking to him, and I realize that the guy I'm dealing with has owned like 45 to 50 monstrous commercial properties throughout the US. He's headquartered in Colorado, and he's done, like, the one dude who he gave me as a reference has bought 30 of them as lease option purchases. So I'm like, okay, if he was really trying to get me, he probably wouldn't have given me a reference for someone who's bought half his portfolio over the last decade. And so I think I just built a lot of trust. And then he offered to stay on as a mentor through the process, because ultimately he still owns the title until we close. So another cool benefit to all of this is this guy who's got way more experience than me gave me his number and was like, hey, any questions you got on the property, on management, on whatever as they arise, like, I'm here. I still have a vested interest in the property. It's your property. You control everything. But, because I still have the title, I'm going to stay on to help you out. So that was another comfort point, is knowing, as we talk about networking, that this gentleman who's far enough down the road that he's building a condo on another island is willing to stay on and answer questions and help with the property for free. So
yeah, that's a unique characteristic of this lease option is this seller has a vested interest in your success in buying the building, unless you just thought he was, a fly-by-night guy and just wanted, your initial, $150,000 down payment, and he was going to move off to Mexico and you'll never see him again. Aside from that, worst case scenario, he does have a vested
better
interest.
Story, right?
Be back on the podcast talking about the story again, that's for sure. Well, hey, one thing I want to ask about this lease option is, did the seller have debt on the property, or was that the reason he was able to provide this lease option structure to you?
Yeah, no. So he got it at a steal because he bought it when it was still vacant. So I'm pretty sure he paid cash for it.
Okay.
And then he's added a pretty substantial amount of value so far. And then we're hopefully going to add a lot more value.
Okay, yeah, that's a vital piece of the lease option. A lot of sellers don't want to do lease options if they have debt on the property, if they have a bank note on it. So, sometimes I know that's a hindrance in this seller financing that I come across pretty frequently.
Yeah. So pretty cool.
Awesome stuff, David. Well, you started out with that duplex, hit that 10 unit, with a HELOC, done a couple flips, done a couple creative things, come into this, really unique. I don't even know what to call it. What did you call it? The Majestic something?
The Majestic Steakhouse is what the signs on the building say. And I'm really tempted to just pull the word steakhouse off because everybody in that town knows the building as the Majestic. Like I'll talk about the area and this building and this, that, and the other, and I get blank stares. And then I'm like, oh yeah, it's the Majestic. Everybody knows, oh yeah, you're buying the Majestic. I'm like, okay, I should probably just keep that sign branded on the side of the building. So
all right, I love it. So yeah, that's what we'll call it then. So you've fallen into this Majestic commercial building. It's going to be an interesting project for sure. You close on it here in a couple of days, so really cool stuff there. Now, what's the future look like for you, and what are your reasons why are you out here doing all this stuff? I mean, it's not easy to invest in real estate, much less halfway across the world, and doing the things you're doing. So talk us through that.
Yeah, so it started as just me wanting to save rent. And then it's kind of become more or less the strategy is like once I retire from the military, whether that's a full retirement or just, not, I move on. Honestly, depending on how real estate goes, I may not need a military pension anymore. But I love the Marine Corps, so it is what it is. But it started off as just kind of a way to ensure that when I got done with the military, I didn't have to go back to working a 9-to-5 job and start from the bottom. And I have always kind of enjoyed entrepreneurial exploits per se. And so I think a lot of the reason why is just to be able to, I love traveling. I get to do that in my current job, but when I'm done with the military, I want to be able to just travel on my own schedule. So my wife would probably go back to working as a counselor if we want to have jobs for the heck of it. And then we'd have summers off. So like, okay, go travel the world, go spend 3 years doing slow travel, go here, go there, spend time with them and just be able to do, I like adventures. I like stories, as you can tell. And so I want to be able to have the time to not have to worry about what my job has to say about whether I'm going to be able to take that much time off. I want to be able to just jump on a plane and go to wherever. And I think that's a big part of the why, the travel, freedom, family.
Yeah, I love it. Those are all really good reasons. And I have no doubt that you're going to hit your future goals and got some exciting stuff in your future. So awesome stuff. Well, David, as we're wrapping up here, we've got a lightning round. It's just a series of questions we ask every one of our guests. You up for it?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, what was your biggest hurdle getting started investing in real estate, and what did you do to overcome that?
Yeah. So knowledge. I had no idea what I was doing. Didn't know anyone at the time who knew what they were doing. And so I decided to find it, which involves a lot of Google. So one of the things I did was I learned how to search Google. You can actually, nobody knows that, but there's a lot of tricks of the trade to utilizing Google to be more efficient in your search engines. But I found just the information that I was looking for or that I didn't know I needed. So I just started reading books and picking people's brains and read via listening to Audible as I drove to work every day. And then I ultimately just took action and figured it out from there.
Yeah, I love it. Well, do you have a personal habit that contributes to your success?
So I like to refer to the Miracle Morning book by Hal Elrod.
Yes.
What gets me up at 04 every morning to, I'm actually been very terrible lately about the savers, which is like the, silence, affirmation, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing,
Yeah.
journaling.
Mhm.
Yeah. I always forget that one because it's just a strange word.
It's a weird S.
Yeah. I've been pretty terrible about that. Lately, it's been like get up, read, 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 edit video, read, 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 because I'm trying to finish Chad Carson's book. But it's still super effective. There's something about getting up that early and having accomplished something before the rest of the world's awake. And there's actually some cool math if you look at like how many extra hours a day you get and how many extra days a year that equates to. It's like a full month worth of the year that I get that nobody else gets by being up 2 hours earlier. So that in itself, and then just networking and listening to books while I commute. I think those three things are like just using your time better is what saves everything.
Yeah, awesome. Savers is a great book by Hal Elrod. It's referenced pretty frequently on the show, so if you haven't picked it up yet, certainly do that. We'll link it in the show notes if you'd like to find that. Well, David, do you have an online resource that you find valuable?
Do I get to plug myself here? Is this where I say like, there's this super valuable resource called From Military to Millionaire, which is my smiling mug on a blog. I'm honestly though, Bigger Pockets. I love Bigger Pockets. But yeah, I run a blog. And so I would like to think that is beneficial. I find it beneficial and valuable, not necessarily from the real estate aspect, but from how much I've learned via networking through the blog and learning through the blog, and then actually putting thoughts out on paper and then turning it into like YouTube videos has been a huge learning experience. I've always said it, but I'm realizing it every day is like learning something is great, but when you can sit and teach it to someone else, that's like a whole nother level of understanding. And not to say that I'm the best teacher, but to say that just forcing myself to be somebody that people ask questions, as I'm sure you have found through podcasting, it really brings you to the next level, because now you're like, oh crap, I don't know the answer to that. I need to find it because I don't want to be the guy who gives bad scoops. So yeah.
Yeah, no, you're doing a lot of cool stuff there, especially on your social media and your blog website there at www.FromMilitaryToMillionaire.com. And I want to jump into a couple of those things in just a minute, but real quick, wrapping up this lightning round, what book would you recommend to the listeners and why?
Okay, so I just thought about this one. I wrote down some others. I mean, there's so many books. So Chad Carson's book is awesome. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, obviously we have to say that one.
Yeah.
Long Distance Real Estate Investing, we already said that. It's wonderful. Set for Life by Scott Trench.
Oh, really good one, yeah.
Bigger Pockets one that's great for like getting started. But I'm going to say this one because it just came to my mind because I didn't bring this up earlier. The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. And I say that it's not a real estate book, but it's a goal book. And it's a mindset book. And to put this in perspective, at the beginning of this year, my wife and I sat down, we wrote out our goals, which I'm kicking myself because like I moved offices and I've torn it apart. I can't find my goal sheet from this year. I had it like 2 weeks ago. I don't know where it went. I'm going to like literally destroy my house looking for that piece of paper. We sat down, we wrote out our goals for the year. And then my goal was to buy 3 more rental units this year. And that was a reasonable goal. And then we were like, okay, I read the book 10X Rule and I was like, all right, let's just 10X all of these. And so we're like 10X, 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 which just means multiply by 10. So now my 3 units became 30 units. And I was like, yeah, that's never going to happen, but it'll push me. Well, 2 months into the year, 3 months into the year, we had closed on the 10 unit. I'm like, wow, that's 3 times what I was originally going to make my goal.
Yeah, maybe we can hit this 10X.
Yeah, maybe. And now when we close on this thing next week, my 30 unit goal will have been almost doubled. And so it's nuts to just think like, man, I was going to buy a triplex this year and now I'm buying like $3 million worth of real estate. Like, holy smokes. So on a mindset book, definitely effective. I would definitely check out the 10X Rule by Grant Cardone.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. That's a great recommendation and a really good reason why behind that book. So 10X by Grant Cardone. We'll link that book in the show notes. If you haven't picked it up, definitely do that, along with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Set for Life, Long Distance Real Estate Investing, all super great books. So yeah, pick all those up. Well, David, last question in our lightning round. If you were to give advice to your 20-year-old self to get started investing in real estate, what would that be?
Read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Because read, network, and take action. Honestly, like I said, I'd always been interested in real estate and I never did anything with it. And I can sit here and say, like I did earlier, that I didn't know anyone who was interested in real estate, this, that, and the other. But the reality is I never went out of my way to learn. I didn't need to know anyone. Had I started reading books and doing my research, I would have found somebody to ask questions of. So just take action, start learning.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. Network, educate, take action. Soon enough, you'll look back and you'll have accomplished something like David has at such a young age, and you'll have, some unique projects under your belt. And yeah, before you know it, you'll be a successful real estate investor. So love it. David, it's been a lot of fun talking with you today. Now, I want to dig into just a little bit of things you're doing over on your blog and website. From Military to Millionaire, tell us what you're doing there, and tell us where the audience members can learn more about you.
Yeah. So, we have an Instagram, a YouTube channel, blog, all of that. It's all titled the same thing, From Military to Millionaire, which is kind of a mouthful, but it's catchy. So we're sticking with it. Really, I was just trying to figure out, like I had all these ideas, like I mentioned a book and I had this and I had that. And I'm scatterbrained and all these things I want to do at once. And I realized if I got a blog and put it all together, then if it's all in one spot, then, hey, whatever I come up with in the future, I can kind of caveat, or that's the wrong word. I hate when people misuse that word, and I just did it. Piggyback off of the blog. If I write a book on something military related, I can probably stick it into that website. If I write a book on real estate or personal development or whatever, I can put it in there. The goal with it and the about page or whatever, the title says military, but it's really for like military, public service, blue collar, like anybody who does not make $6 million a year, and even if you do make $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year, like the principles are the same, but it's to really help those of us who don't have high paying jobs understand that like there are strategies and methods to make yourself successful this way. Don't let your income stop you from ever having wealth.
Oh, I love that. Such a powerful statement there. Don't let your income stop you from having wealth. It seems a little counterintuitive, might seem a little silly if you just take it on surface value, but dig into that, man. So cool. So you're helping a lot of people, just kind of find their way, helping people get started investing in real estate, showing people that, hey, this is possible. Here's how I've done it. It's not exactly the way for everybody, but, here's some things I've learned. And you're really active on social media, lots of, investing advice there. So really cool stuff. So if anybody wants to look you up, social media is a great place, or go over to your website, www.FromMilitaryToMillionaire.com. That'll be linked in the show notes. So thanks so much for that, David. Well, hey, it's been really fun having you on the podcast. Now, wrapping up here, is there any kind of parting piece of advice you'd like to leave with the audience?
I would just say the same thing I've reiterated a million times. Just take action. Just go do something, whether that's going to a meetup, buying a book, or buying a property. It doesn't matter how big the step is. It's just actually doing it. It's really easy to read a book and learn about something or talk about something or say I'm a real estate investor, but like I refused to use that term until I owned I didn't have a set number, but until I owned, like 3 properties. Like I told myself like, hey, until you own enough properties that you can say it with like a plural, you're not going to call yourself a real estate investor. And that was a personal thing. And that is not to say that by buying a house, you're not a real estate investor, but that is to say that, saying you're a real estate investor does not make you a real estate investor. Saying you're a blogger does not make you a blogger. Don't say it, just do it, right? Like just go take action, make it happen. Who cares about the label? Just go take your success into your own hands and make stuff happen.
Yeah, I love it. Well, take action, make for a good story, and, pray the rest will turn out great. So, David, it's been a lot of fun having you on the podcast today. We're going to have to follow up and check out how that new project's coming along after you close and get it all, renovated and performing well. So, love to have you back on the podcast in the future. And until next time, take care, man.
Sounds good, Jacob. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, David. All right, that wraps up this week's episode with our guest, David Pere. Well, hey, I hope you got tons of value from today's episode. If you like what you've heard, please go over and leave a rating and review on whichever platform you're listening on. And if you'd like to connect with David, visit www.FromMilitaryToMillionaire.com. from militarytomillionaire.com. Those will be linked in the show notes. Till next week, engineer the lifestyle you want.
You've been listening to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast, providing you actionable content to build your real estate empire. Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for personal advice. The opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have a potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom, LLC, exclusively.